Hello, everyone. Oh, we need some light. My name is Cameron Cowan. Welcome to the Cameron Journal News Hour. This is so exciting. I hope everyone had a really great Thanksgiving. I hope you got some time off to rest and relax this weekend. I did, and I felt tired today. It was the first day back after a long holiday weekend. I had emails to handle, multiple meetings to go to, recording over here, lots of stuff going on. It was nuts. Today has been nuts, but I'm glad to be here with you all. I want to thank all of our Cameron Journal Plus subscribers. Thank you so much for being subscribed. I also want to remind everyone that you have two options to sign up for the newsletter. You can go to cameronjournal.com/newsletter and sign up there, or you can head over to my Substack, cameronjournal.substack.com, and sign up there. Free is wonderful. We love to sign up for free. We also love when you pay to support the journalism. If you want to sign up for Cameron Journal Plus specifically, head over to cameronjournal.com/subscribe, or just pick a paid tier on Substack. Both of those support the journalism, and every week in the newsletter, which we did not have on Saturday because of the holiday, I didn't feel like writing it. Y'all didn't feel like reading it. There is a opportunity to tip me on coffee if you'd rather just slip me $5 to keep this journalism going. So thank you, everyone. Also, thank you, everyone, for watching all of our shorts and reels and videos. Views are up, and that is a really amazing thing to watch so many people interacting, leaving comments, engaging, all this type of thing. I have struggled with engagement forever until about the last 6 months or so. Then, and especially the last couple months, engagement really has started to happen, which is really exciting. So thank you all for continuing to engage. We have a bunch of news stories tonight. There is so many just crazy things happening in the world. We're going to get into Pete Hegseth and the Pete Hegseth and the boat scandal, which is interesting. And we're also going to get into a kind of a brewing scandal in Oklahoma about a transgender professor who was fired because they failed a girl who used the Bible as a source for why gender is not fluid and there's only two genders, and kind of failed to engage with an article around the subject. And as someone who went to college and was conservative and went to college in a small college in a rural area in the reddest of red, deep Trump land, I have thoughts about all of that. So we're going to get into all that. We're also going to get into a little bit of foreign policy. So I have a bunch of news stories tonight. So we're going to move quickly. We're not going to waste time here. We're going to dive right in to the headlines. And we're going to start with this rather odd video, we'll say, about a man kind of freaking out in the subway in New York City. The focus is on the man freaking out. The focus is on the narrative and the framing. Mom Donnie's election to New York City, Trump's seeming embrace of him, and how this is going to be talked about moving forward, because you're going to want to watch out for this. Here we go. So let's do this, and let's do this, and let's go.
I'm knocking the fuck out.
You ain't knocking shit out. I will cut your
Right.
Now, bearing
This
in
nigga been
mind,
tripping for the last couple of
bearing
stops.
in mind,
Like,
this
look
dude
at
is
him.
white, and it's obviously a black
Nobody charged you
woman,
with shit, nigga.
like,
You need to
is
go to
recording.
rehab. Go ahead. 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 I want you to. Try me. Yeah. Come on. The fuck? Like, niggas is tired of you. Nigga tripping. I don't know if they put coke in his fucking ear or something.
And so the interaction goes on. Obviously, the other passengers, these two dudes, are trying to get him to calm down. It's obviously this man has drugs or mental health issues. But here's the log line. And it says here, I don't understand why anyone would want to take the NYC subway. It's like one big cesspool of wild zoo animals. Not wrong. And it's just going to get worse under Mom Donnie when it's free for everyone. The homeless will live on it. And everyone's like, oh yeah, it's too dangerous to take the subway anymore. This is such a disappointment. That man is a danger, should be locked up in a psychiatric hospital. True. This person points out the subway won't be free. Not sure where you get that idea. Also, good luck on making the buses free. He can't just snap his fingers and do that. He still needs it approved by the governor and the state legislature. Not sure why they'll be on board with how he wants to do it. And it's, and someone's saying, no, it's not that bad. And it says here, bridge and tunnel guy came to NYC to get wasted. You see a lot of these people at Penn Station waiting for their trains back to New Jersey on the weekend. And someone saying nonsense from someone who clearly doesn't live in the city. I take the subway maybe half a dozen times a week. It's mostly rather boring. And, it's, yeah, it's a crazy, a crazy thing, a crazy situation. But again, you're going to start seeing this type of thing a lot more. So from a narrative perspective, it's really important to understand, like, this is going to be, especially as Mom Donnie goes along, you're going to see more of this from accounts like this and people responding. The reason I kind of stopped at it is because, honestly, I'll be honest, it's usually a black person freaking out on the subway, and the fact that it's a white dude in a quarter zip who clearly has some sort of mental health problem or is so drunk, he's going to be really worried about this getting passed around for 116,000 views on just this one account. I'm sure it's elsewhere. Is going to be a big problem for him. It was a good entree, but I thought it was interesting because we don't usually see this dynamic, and it's still blaming Mom Donnie, it's still blaming free transportation, and a lot of people will say, this is why we can't have nice things in this country. And this is something where, having transit police on trains to deal with this sort of thing and not the passengers, especially on the lines where there's the most incidences, is still not a bad idea. It was probably one of the better things that Eric Adams did in terms of putting the police on subways and all this type of thing. But I am a fan of transit security. When you go visit other cities around the world that have transit, there's usually someone to call. It's not the passengers, dealing with guys like this. But the unfortunate thing is there's going to be this narrative, this continuing narrative that everything in the cities is crazy. It's all burning down. There's too many crazy people, all out of fear. So just wanted to put that out there. Just wanted to kind of start us off with, because again, these things, people don't understand that in the minds of people, this stuff adds up. It creates an impression, it creates an idea. It's very important to understand that this is not a typical experience, but it is being used to enforce a certain narrative. And remember, this account, which I don't think it is real, but the bio is Patriot, America First, MAGA Trump supporter, 1A, 2A, all this sort of thing. It's always the same accounts pushing the same narrative. Watch out for it, look for it, understand it. Moving on. Now, we're going to dive right into the middle of the Pete Hegseth boat scandal situation. Do I want to start with that one or do I want to start with this one? I think I might want to start with this one because it includes the boat footage. So, in case you hadn't heard, and we're gonna watch here in a minute, is we've been doing missile strikes against narco-terrorists in Venezuela, even though the evidence that any of these boats are actually carrying drugs is a bit weak, interestingly enough. That deserves a little bit more look into before we really say that that's true. But for those who have been looking into it, it seems like there's not necessarily a big group of evidence. But either way, we've been doing these bombings. Okay, sure, we're stopping the flow of drugs into the country. That's fine. The issue is with this particular one, and we'll see this in a second, is you've had, you'll have these, they bombed a boat. The boat was only partially destroyed. There were survivors, things hanging on. It is illegal due to international law and military law to, kill survivors, sort of thing. They're supposed to be arrested and taken in. The order was given to blow them up anyway. Following that, 6 Democrats, including Senator Mark Kelly, who we talked about last week, and who actually, I heard a great interview on with Rachel Maddow on Monday, made a video reminding U.S. military members that they were allowed to refuse illegal orders. And so I was kind of wondering with all of this, what constitutes an illegal order and how does the person on the ground decide that? So this afternoon I gave my buddy Jeremiah a call, and I called him because he was in the military, in the Army, I believe, and he was in a proper war in the sandbox. And I said, how would you make that decision? He's like, well, here's the sad part. He's like, it's a very hard thing to do. There's all these rules and there's general standing orders and all this sort of thing. He's like, but here's the stupid thing. He's like, the person actually doing it might not even know what they're doing is illegal. And he's like, here's the other problem. A lot of people, your common everyday sailor, infantryman, all this type of thing, doesn't necessarily want to deal with the paperwork and the issues that come from refusing an illegal order, and will do it anyway, just because the minute you do that, it starts a whole bureaucratic and legal process that can jeopardize your whole future, and you can go to jail if you're not right, and all this type of thing. And so he's like, it's a really hard thing. And then he had to go because he was going to a meeting, so we didn't get to talk. But it was because I was kind of like, I'm a pretty smart person. And I'd be kind of like, oh, we're firing on this. We're in a war situation. I don't have time to check my law book, to find out if what you're doing is illegal. I, too, would probably just press the button and fire. Now, I understand for, like, Admiral Bradley, who's in charge of Southcom and who is overseeing all these operations, he does have time to go consult the law book, all this sort of thing. But that's being handled at the high level. So how do you really do this? And out of that, Trump has called that video by Democrats, reminding soldiers and military members they don't have to follow illegal orders, has called that seditious. And so Eric Doherty, which is a right-wing grifter, he's the chief content officer at Florida Voice News, and he does this posting all day, every day. Breaking news, blew the whistle, blah, 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 all this stuff. And he's a MAGA supporter, like, because, Florida. So that gets us to this tweet, which is Senator Eric Schmidt just blew the whistle that elected Democrats are fomenting a color revolution after urging sedition, threatening prosecution if they take power. Now, here's the reality. When you are killing survivors in a war zone, that's considered a violation of international law. People at Nuremberg were prosecuted for that after World War II, and the defense of I was just following orders was not a defense. And we're already kind of getting into that line. Now, here's the other thing. If you're unfamiliar with what a color revolution is, I looked up kind of the origin of the term. I don't know what the ultimate origin is, but its most recent use was after a series of nonviolent protest revolutions in some various former Soviet countries, and they would use colors to symbolize the protest of the revolution. And it ultimately changed several governments after they lost any and all popular support. Hence the term color revolution, because they would go outside with flags, other colors, they'd wear them on their face, all this type of thing. And the largesse of that organized protest toppled governments in former Soviet republics like Georgia. And so Eric Schmidt was on Fox News talking about this and says this is the language of a color revolution where you're calling on military men and women to disobey orders, and you put that on top of firebombing Tesla dealerships, the riots you see in the streets, the persecution of a political opponent. The Democrats have completely lost the plot here, and the American people, I think, see that. But it's a very dangerous road to go down here to say you should be disobeying orders because we don't like Trump. That's not what Democrats are saying, but let's watch the full clip for context, shall we? Let's do.
We'll point out, though, Harris, one of the crazy things that happened over the weekend, the Democrats, elected Democrats, not some online troll, elected Democrats have been saying it's okay to disobey orders. That's the first step. But what we saw happen this weekend through some of those same elected officials was to say basically to military men and women, look out, you might get prosecuted. This is not the language of we'll beat them in the next election or we'll win the argument. This is the language of a color revolution where you're calling on military men and women to disobey orders, and you put that on top of the firebombing of Tesla dealerships, the riots you see in the streets, the prosecution of a political opponent. The Democrats have completely lost the plot here. The American people, I think, see that. But it's a very dangerous road to go down here to say you should be disobeying orders because we don't like Trump. We'll point out, though, Harris, one of the crazy...
Okay, that was a very accurate rendering of what he said. This is a very interesting situation. There's more information on this. I don't want to break this down at the single because I have a couple other clips. So let's move on to the next one. So this was a CNN situation. And retired U.S. Colonel Cedric Layton is making the argument that their obligation was to disobey that order. So let's look at it from the other angle.
But if they did see, if they were aware, or if they understood that there was even a possibility of survivors from this, their obligation was to disobey that order.
So disobeying that order. So in other words, if they went ahead and obeyed that order, supposedly, presumably, they might be committing a war crime and could be punished even though their superior officers had ordered them to do so.
Yes, that is correct. So that is one of the problems that you have when it comes to actually handling the laws of warfare, because sometimes in the fog of war, you don't necessarily see all the things that are going on. So a lot will depend on exactly what the responses are to the investigations, like Congress has talked about. Both the House and Senate have talked about investigating this matter. They absolutely need to do that because this is critical to the way in which not only we fight wars as the United States of America, the types of ROEs or rules of engagement that we follow, but it's also critical in terms of protecting the lives of the people at sea, both U.S. people as well as foreigners.
While I have you, Colonel, turn to Ukraine as well. Lots going on.
Yeah, we don't need to hear about all that. And that definitely, I mean, that kind of sets a different, I would say a different tone, especially with it coming from someone of the military. And it has, and I mean, based upon that, you could say, okay, this doesn't really necessarily have anything to do with any sort of color revolution or, nonviolent protest, but rather a very practical idea of if you're doing things that are illegal, you're putting yourself in danger because the actions ordered against you could be against the military code of justice. It could also be against international law. There may be prosecutions for that. The last time I heard a lot of talk about this was a long time ago during Iraq. And the it was very interesting because there was a lot of talk about, oh, who's going to prosecute the war crimes in Iraq, all this sort of thing. And this is probably getting louder calls than anything we did in any of the sandboxes, which I find interesting. Oh, and this is a really good comment from YouTube. Perception is reality, though, and based on the Democratic Party rhetoric, it's not a far leap. Yes, I mean that is kind of the problem, and that's why I thought these two clips were so important. Is because it's like, okay, that's one idea of looking at it, but then there's kind of also this deeply practical and pragmatic thing. As I always say, there is a delta between the reality and the truth, and we try to stay in the middle space where we can actually talk about this stuff in some ways that's sane. I mean, and I agree with the comment here, for the median voter. Yeah, I mean, here's the reality is, like, and I always talk about this where, someone's going to see their exposure to this story, their only exposure to this story may be the clip of this show where I'm talking about it. And that could be the only thing they're really aware of because they're not a news junkie. They're busy. They have bills to pay. They have children to look after, all this sort of thing. And so, yeah, when you have elected Democrats coming out and telling the military, oh, hey, we got your back, don't obey illegal orders, it's like, well, that seems funny. Isn't that kind of part of the whole military thing, you obey orders sort of thing? And then you have these elected Democrats being like, well, maybe not so fast because of this really odd situation about small boats in the Caribbean sort of thing. I think they're definitely, I mean, and this gets into the failures of the Democrat brand, the failure, the perception issues with Democrats that will not be fixed overnight, may not be fixed for a generation. All of this adds up to this kind of very difficult situation. And I think a lot of people, for better or for worse, are probably not going to see the practical side of it, like retired U.S. Colonel Cedric Layton talks about, but rather it's going to seem a lot more, oh, Trump is doing something and the Democrats are complaining again. Or the Democrats are trying to do an end run around the president. All this sort of thing. Even though there's something very real here. And that gets me in to the third clip, which ironically came from Fox News and ironically came from a woman named Jessica Tarlov. And let's just listen to this because this is really interesting.
Well, I think that there's always a choice, and you're right about the demand issue, and I wish that we could do more about that. And this has been going on forever, that we have a drug consumption problem here and a drug supply problem coming from South and Latin America. So I totally get that. But when you're looking at how this fight is being executed at this particular moment, it doesn't make a lot of sense. First and foremost, the fact that no one can confirm that we've actually been taking out narco traffickers or huge drug traffickers, however you want to say it. And last week when we were talking about this, Dana had just seen the alert that the admiral in charge of the Southern Command had resigned. And he was the one who was in charge of this. And the reporting is that he wasn't comfortable with the mission and had been pushing back within the Pentagon. And do you think he would have resigned if everything was by the book? So we have 32 people that have been killed so far, 7 individual strikes. We know that the Colombian president is alleging at least that an innocent fisherman was murdered. We know that there's a family from Trinidad who's saying that a member of their family was killed. And then it is really important that we have repatriated 2 people, one to Colombia, one to Ecuador, because that indicates that we don't have any evidence to prosecute them, that we didn't know who these guys were. Because if you did have evidence, you would bring them before a court. And I know that you're going to make fun of me, and I am prepared for it each and every day. But drug traffickers also have rights. The law applies. We should have the evidence they should be charged with something, and they should come before a court of law. And Rand Paul was on the Sunday shows this weekend, and he said to Kristen Welker, when you kill someone, if you're not in a declared war, which we are not, Congress with the war powers, you really need to know someone's name at least. You have to accuse them of something. You have to present evidence. So all these people have been blown up without any evidence of a crime. They're also saying that it's about fentanyl, and people who analyze the area are saying that there is drugs that go through, but it's mostly cocaine and marijuana that are headed actually to Europe and to Africa. So the government story is not adding up.
And so this one, and I kind of wanted to, great comment. They were into education. They love music and helping us out. I mean, yeah, I mean, there always is that narrative about these kind of ne'er-do-well people sort of thing. And I think that's I think there's an interesting, an interesting sort of idea about, the lack of evidence the government's right. And I honestly thought it was interesting that this was on Fox News. And so as I was kind of preparing for today's show and I watched this video, I was kind of like, I mean, this is an interesting thing to be on Fox News. This is an interesting thing that even Rand Paul's kind of like, hey, maybe we should have a little bit more evidence, a little bit more information, and we're basically doing, sort of extrajudicial killing. Brian Allen here describes it as state-sanctioned killing dressed up as counterterrorism, and they're hoping you don't ask why the courts were never involved, sort of thing. It's a very interesting, you have sort of around this story, these three very interesting narratives. You have the Democrats saying, hey, military, don't follow illegal orders, which one could describe as trying to undermine the military operation at a level. You then have this idea that, oh, we're trying to stop drug traffickers in the Caribbean, and these guys don't have, any rights because they're drug traffickers. And, oh, but wait, they do, and the evidence for all of this is rather weak anyway. And you have this very practical thing of being like, yeah, shooting them twice was possibly illegal. You have all of these kind of different narratives around this story. And to kind of sum it all up and bring it all together, which I don't think that, the next clip, that's a different but related thing from Fareed Zakaria. This is a very interesting perilous thing. And honestly, this is why, and this gets into the Fareed Zakaria clip, now I know why this one is next. This is why when you have people, institutions, and you have divided power, that also brings accountability. Is it harder to get stuff done? Absolutely. Does it take more work to move things forward? Absolutely. Is our government moribund due to a variety of factors, especially corporate donations and Congress people who spend all their time raising money? Also, yes. But the advantage is you also get accountability for these types of actions. People get to set standards of what is and is not acceptable and what can and cannot be done. And the reality is it appears, somewhat out of bounds, especially given that the authorizations for military force, AUFMs, from the global war on terrorism were canceled years ago. And now they're just doing this, without a lot of evidence, on, the kind of very odd legal situation that I'm sure can be solved, and without a lot of evidence. And I think it's a very interesting, it's an interesting dynamic, it's an interesting problem. I don't necessarily think the Democrats have their messaging right on this. I think, leading the charge with the video saying, oh, don't follow legal orders is maybe not so good. You perhaps needed a different video kind of explaining what it was and what the liabilities and problems were. But unfortunately, them calling for the military not to follow legal orders is their addition to the conversation. And so now the narrative about this war on boats in the Caribbean, that's now the other half of it, which makes posts like Eric Darty saying, oh, this is a color revolution sort of thing, makes sense, narratively speaking, because Democrats don't lead the charge by saying this should not be happening, which actually gets into this clip from Fareed Zakaria, which I think is the cherry on top, this lovely dessert. We're not going to watch the whole thing, we're just going to watch the first bit.
To give its head of army expanded powers, including lifetime immunity from legal prosecution. My friend replied, "We're just following in America's footsteps. Didn't your Supreme Court rule that the president could kill his political opponent and yet be immune from prosecution?" Welcome to America's new democratic export, the unchecked executive. If America's founding fathers were to come back and look at their legacy, what would stun them, without a doubt, is the modern presidency. They designed the American political system explicitly to fragment power. They were reacting against a monarch and the accumulation of all powers in the same hands. That's a quote from Federalist 47. They purposefully conceived of a decentralized and restrained executive, described in the notably brief Article 2. The presidency was an office for faithfully executing the laws, bounded by carefully constructed checks from the legislature and the judiciary. Congress, by contrast, was named the first branch of government and vested with the lion's share of authority, the powers to tax, spend, declare war, and regulate commerce. James Madison, the de facto author of the Constitution, explicitly acknowledged this fact in Federalist 51, writing that in Republican government, the legislative authority necessarily predominates.
I will say, and this kind of makes the point, if you haven't gone and read Federalist 51, you need to. I have been meaning to make a video on Federalist 51 forever. Of all the Federalist Papers making the arguments for the Constitution in the early Republic, Federalist 51 is by and large and by far the most important. Yes, you should, of all of them, you should definitely go read Federalist 51. It is the most important. And there's a Fareed Zakaria clip is very well taken. The point of all of that is very, very simple. And it's this, that when power is decentralized, you tend to have a lot less of these problems. A lot of what we're seeing now is the very typical reaction to a regime that is moving in an authoritarian direction. What we're seeing now is the reaction to high concentrations of power and the lacking of institutional accountability that we're used to in this country. There has been conversations about the imperial presidency for a long time. This is not new, and this isn't a uniquely Trump problem. I would say Trump's contribution is that he's moving the bar rather quickly down the field, sort of thing. You know, he's lowering it and shoving it down the field kind of at the same time. And so now all these sort of very gnarly constitutional questions are starting to pop up. And the question at the center of them all is, does the Constitution still apply? Are we still following the shared rules, norms, and values? Trump certainly has not given a care about any norms. I think he does care about a certain set of values that happen to be very opposite from the party opposite. And so far, I think there's a lot of lip service being paid to the Constitution, but it's quite obvious coming out of this boat scandal, they kind of want to do what they want to do. And to be very honest, I think a lot of the outrage in our current society is because we're not used to that. We've had institutional transparency for so long. We've had other people involved for so long. It's required consent of others for so long that we're not used to dealing with an executive who comes in and just does stuff. Now, my MAGA colleagues would say, yeah, we're not, and that's a good thing. And thank God we're at a place where we can have that. And I would say, maybe not so fast. Let's call our friends in Eastern Europe and see how that's going. Let's call some of our friends in Asia and Africa and see how that's going. Living under a regime like that is really hard day to day. It's not a fun thing to do. It makes interacting with the government in any capacity incredibly difficult. Ask anyone who lives in an HOA. You don't necessarily want large concentrations, especially of national power. And indeed, with this, in this situation, in this time, we have a lot of power and a lot of capability increasingly being consolidated into one person. And that's going to reset the expectations of the American presidency moving forward. Biden tried to bring back the norms and values from the pre-Trump era. Didn't really work. And he only lasted one term. So obviously people weren't necessarily too enthusiastic about that. reality is in 2028, whoever wins is going to end up with a whole lot more power and a whole new set of norms that we are not used to dealing with. And whether we're looking at bombing boats in the Caribbean or tariffs over here or whatever have you, the reality of the American presidency is changing. And we're living in under a national government that increasingly is not as small d democratic or small r Republican as it used to be. And that puts our lives as Americans and the type of lifestyles we've gotten used to, the type of access to capital markets we've gotten used to, the type of economic situation we've gotten used to, in deep, deep peril. Those types of regimes are not exactly known for their robust economies, their wonderful economic growth, or much of anything else. They're known for a lot of stagnation, a lot of poverty, and a lot of other issues, and a lot of concentration in wealth, a lot of concentrations of wealth in the hands of a connected few people. That's the road we're now heading down at a pretty nice clip, and that should give us all a great deal of pause. You should go watch the rest of this Fareed Zakaria clip. It's on YouTube and it's on his Twitter page. It's quite good. I love Fareed Zakaria. Don't always agree with him, but I like him. Let's move on from bombing boats in the Caribbean, because we spent a lot of time on that. Let's get into the latest updates on the Epstein situation. We do not have files yet. There's still days and weeks to go. I think the 20th of December is the final deadline. This guy, Representative James Comer from Texas, is oh, I'm sorry. No, he's from Kentucky. There's another guy named with that name from Texas. This guy's from Kentucky, and he is this tweet is a bit disingenuous. They're trying to say that there was it was all the Democrats cozying up with Jeffrey Epstein, and this guy has a fundraising email from Hakeem Jeffries to Epstein to prove that it was all the Democrats' fault, when we don't have that evidence yet. We're gonna watch 30 seconds of this. Let's watch.
So let's read it to make sure. To Jeffrey Epstein, and that's the real Jeffrey Epstein, not Jasmine Crockett's Jeffrey Epstein. This is the real Jeffrey Epstein. From Hakeem Jeffries' campaign. Dear Jeffrey, we are thrilled that we are working with Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, one of the rising stars of the New York delegation, sometimes referred to as Brooklyn's Barack. Hakeem is committed to electing a Democrat majority in 2014 and is encouraging his friends to participate in a DCCC fundraising dinner with President Obama and Hakeem Jeffries. It ends with a number for Jeffrey Epstein to call to go to the dinner and, quote, get an opportunity to get to know Hakeem better. Here's the evidence. The email speaks for itself.
It's a fundraising email. That email was sent out to a lot of people. I don't have solid proof of that. It reads like a fundraising email. It doesn't read like a regular, ordinary garden variety, personal email or anything like that. It's a fundraising email. Epstein was well known to be a donor for Democrats and others. He gave a lot of money to politicians, which was definitely the nature of his business. That's why he's photographed with so many of them, is because he went to a lot of fundraising dinners. So I would fully anticipate this, but I do laugh that the narrative from, again, another MAGA and Texan AF, patriot and the deep state, military police supporter, God, country, family, type of account, and some of these are even not even American. They ran from India for clicks and monetization. Is all posting this like this is some sort of, big information figure thing out, drop, whatever have you. And it's not. It just isn't. It's a kind of sad thing, because the reality is when we get the actual files, not a fundraising email from the Jeffrey Epstein emails, which were a separate drop not connected with what the DOJ is coming out with. We've had this information. Bloomberg wrote an article about it. I talked about it on this show. This isn't new. When we get the actual DOJ investigation that actually points names and fingers, that will be actual interesting evidence, not whatever email some Congress critter, backbencher from Kentucky managed to figure out. The point being is, be careful when you see this stuff, be mindful of what it is, listen to it, and then most importantly, think and engage your brain. By the way, if you find something on social media that you don't understand or are trying to figure out more about, I love to take reader requests. So, make sure to shoot me an email, just email@CameronJournal.com. Send that over to me, and then I will address it on the show, the next one that I do. So, I just wanted to stop here to say, yeah, this is cute, but it doesn't tell us anything. When the final Epstein files come out and we figure out the responsible parties, we can then prosecute them at this time. This is a bit disingenuous. This is just playing politics with it as a distraction. As one does, not saying that's a bad thing, as one does, that's how the game's played, but that's what it is. So before you get all verklempt about the whole thing, let's make sure to remember to engage our brains. Because in this day and age, when you have these types of news narratives running around and you have everyone trying to get a gotcha moment or trying to shift public opinion, which can happen with a video that's already been viewed 80.7 thousand times, all this type of thing, you have to really learn how to think for yourself. You really have to engage your brain with what's happening here. Otherwise, you'll be angry all the time, which is great news for tech companies, and it's bad news for your mental health, and it's bad news for your understanding of the world, a sober understanding of the world going on around us. And that's what we're offering here at the Cameron Journal. Now, I want to get into our final kind of big story of the evening before we do some cleanup at the end. And this gets into, actually, I have these out of order. Let me start with the actual, the story. So, this so the big story, and this has been promoted by Turning Point USA, this transgender professor failed a student for quoting the Bible in her essay. Professor Mel Kurth at the University of Oklahoma said Samantha failed Samantha K over quoting scripture in a essay about gender roles. This isn't quite true, and we actually have a copy of the paper. And this person says here, I was a TA in women's studies. I taught 2 courses and 65 students. My courses were writing intensive. I read her paper. I would have failed her too. This has nothing to do with the professor being transgender. She didn't engage in the article in question. She attempted to replace empirical evidence with theology. She continually restated religious dogma in a secular course. And lastly, she said many things that even as this person would find to be discriminatory. She's allowed to disagree with the article, but if she wants a good grade, she needs to engage with the course material. She needs to think critically about it. And we have screenshots of the paper in question, and it does it does seem like she's going into all of this and quoting the Bible directly, rather than engaging with this article in a psychology course about gender roles. And her paper says here, this article is very thought-provoking and caused me to thoroughly evaluate the idea of gender roles, gender and the role it plays in our society. The article discussed peers using testing as a way to enforce gender norms. I don't necessarily see this as a problem. God made male and female and made us differently from each other on purpose and for a purpose. God is very intentional with what he makes, and I believe trying to change that would only do more harm. Gender roles and tendencies should be not considered stereotypes. Women naturally want to do womanly things because God created us with these womanly desires in our hearts. The same goes for men. God created men in the image of his courage and strength, and he created women in the image of his beauty. He intentionally created women differently than men and should live our lives with that in mind. And it gets into this God making woman to be a helper and all this sort of normal. If you've been to a church in the South in the last 35 years, nothing she's saying here is surprising. And it says here, I do not think men and women are pressured to be more masculine or feminine. I strongly disagree with the idea that the article is that encouraging acceptance of diverse gender expressions could improve students' confidence. Society pushing the lie that there are multiple genders and everyone might be whatever they want to be is demonic and severely harms American youth. I do not want kids in school to be teased or bullied in school. However, pushing the lie that everyone has their own truth and everyone can do whatever they want and be whoever they want is not biblical whatsoever. The Bible says that our lives are not our own, that our lives and bodies belong to the Lord for his glory. I live my life based on this truth and firmly believe that there would be less gender issues and insecurities in children if they were raised knowing that they do not belong to themselves, they belong to the Lord. Again, I mean, none of this is surprising to me. I grew up with this. I get where she's coming from. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is because I kind of was this student. I was very conservative when I was in college. I went to a relatively small school in a very, very red Republican area of the country. And this type of discussion and this sort of struggle in writing about stuff was not uncommon, and that was almost 20 years ago, because I started in 2007 and I graduated in 2009. College was a long time ago. And this was a thing back then, especially in a place like that, where a girl like this who would just say, well, the Bible just doesn't tell me to do that. I'm sorry, it's Oklahoma. In the South, that's an acceptable answer. Like, I get where she's coming from, but I also understand the professor being like, okay, well, that's not evidence. Like, sorry, but that does not, I mean, and that probably doesn't even go with the academic standards of the department in Oklahoma. And so, and I was kind of like, huh, okay, let's look into this more. So the Oklahoma Freedom Caucus has gotten involved in all of this, and are making it a First Amendment issue. And so it says here, the University of Oklahoma says it's open an evaluation process, and that is appropriate, but we should be honest about what their statement deliberately avoids. This is not just a process issue. A student at a taxpayer-funded university was given a 0 because her biblical convictions offended an instructor. That is a First Amendment concern on its face, and OU does not need to wait for a review to affirm the principle. OU could say today, without compromising any investigation, the students may not be penalized for sincerely held religious beliefs, the professors cannot grade on ideology, and the biblical reasoning is not disqualifying in a reaction paper. They did not say any of that. Instead, they relied on procedural language, isolated the problem to one graduate student, and avoided acknowledging the deeper issue, a culture where some faculty believe they can use state authority to punish dissenting worldviews. The reality is a review may resolve one incident, but it does not fix a system drifting away from the values of Oklahoma's people. Integrity requires acknowledging the underlying problem, not just managing the optics. And this is, before I even read this morning, I already knew the position that they were going to take. Obviously, Oklahoma Freedom Caucus is very conservative. They're supporting, their MTG, Lauren Boebert, the whole crew. And I laugh because, again, if you're from the South, saying, well, the Bible just tells me not to do that, or that's not biblical, is a complete sentence. Like, I get it. I get where they're coming from. And they're not wrong. If you stopped 10 Oklahomans in Tulsa on the street and said, hey, the Bible told us not to do this, should we do it? I guarantee you 7 out of 10 would nod and say, nope, then we shouldn't do it, and tell you to have a nice day and proceed on with their lives. The statement says here that the college acted immediately to address the academic issue raised by the student. College leaders contacted her on the day her letter was received and have maintained regular communication throughout the process. As previously stated, a formal grade appeals process was conducted. The process resulted in steps to ensure no academic harm to the student from the graded assignments. Second, the student reported filing a claim of illegal discrimination based on religious beliefs to the appropriate university office. OU has a clear process for reviewing such claims, and it has been activated. The graduate student instructor has been placed on administrative leave pending the finalization of this process. To ensure fairness in the process, a full-time professor is serving as the course instructor for the remainder of the semester. OU remains firmly committed to fairness, respect, and protecting every student's right to express sincerely held religious beliefs. And you can see my comment right there. Quoting the Bible is not evidence. I was a student like her too back in the day and would have been failed, and rightly so. If you're gonna take that track on an issue like this, there's a way to do that But you can't just be like, well, the Bible tells me that just ain't right, and we're supposed to be this way. There's a different way to approach that, where you can get that in. But you have to say it the right way, and you have to approach it the right way to kind of get past people's natural aversion to it. And she didn't really try to do that. And I understand why the professor was kind of like, well, you're not quoting anything from the article, at least in the screenshots we saw. You're not explaining it beyond, well, the Bible just told us that's not the way it's supposed to be, sort of thing. That's, I mean, especially when you're a psychology major and presumably going to become a therapist, and you may be having someone who's struggling with their gender identity walk into your office or your practice or your medical facility or whatever have you. You've got to be able to, understand that if they're a young person, struggling with sexuality or gender identity, be able to handle that and deal with that without, just kind of dogmatically being stuck in a Bible sort of thing. And I'm not saying that's necessarily where she was going, but I think that's where the professor maybe was going, was to understand the psychology, because it was a psychology course, behind it all. And there was kind of this religious dogma sort of thing. And it's I haven't read the comments in a minute. It's like, delusional much, theology was not relevant to the course. Oh well, don't know what to tell you, Mary Sue. Yeah, like, I mean, yes, and I'm not gonna read another comment because that's an inside joke. But yes, I mean, that is, I mean, and again, I was the conservative student on campus who was doing this. I know where she's coming from. I get it, but the reality is, if you're gonna be a psychologist or a psychiatrist or I'm sorry, a therapist rather, you're working in the psychology field, this is going to be something you're going to confront. And you can't just beat them over the head with the Bible. You've got to actually engage with it. And that's why, if she had been clever, she could have gotten her way in a very clever way and gotten a good mark on the paper. But she's not that clever, sort of thing. But you can't fall back into religious dogma in those moments. You have to engage with it, especially if you're going to be a therapist. Even a Christian therapist, I guarantee you, if you're a Christian therapist, people are going to walk into your office with gender expression issues and sexuality expression issues. And even if you're engaging that from a biblical perspective, you have to understand that. And her failure to engage is the real reason why that paper didn't make it. And then finally, just to remind you how this whole thing was started and why we're even talking about it, it has to do with the Professor Watch List as launched by Turning Point USA. Now, the way this person talks about it is a bit caustic, so forgive that. But it was reminding of the fact that Charlie Kirk launched the Professor Watch List, which is a blacklist that conservatives still use today to relentlessly harass professors and ruin their careers. Charlie Kirk didn't fight cancel culture, he professionalized it, monetized it, and weaponized it. If the left had created Professor Watch List to target conservative professors, would Republicans still call it free speech, or would they be screaming censorship? Well, there's very few conservative professors, so we're never going to have to worry about that. But I wanted to save that to point out that the reason this is a national scandal and the reason we're talking about it is because of that right there. This was first promoted by a Turning Point USA Oklahoma University chapter. And that this sort of thing in academia has been going on for a while. It predates Turning Point USA, sort of thing. The pot calling the kettle black. I mean, yeah, kind of. This tension between professors and like conservative or Christian students long predates Turning Point USA and Charlie Kirk. There was a scandal several years ago. I need to do a special video on it. The University of Colorado at Boulder, which is very liberal, hired, so they could have ideological diversity in their department, hired a conservative professor. And, oh my God, it caused a huge scandal. I'm not saying that, that this is, all being handled the right way or all this type of thing, but we do end up with this kind of weird situation where, people get targeted, news stories that would have not gotten national attention get national attention because of this. We need to kind of understand the system sort of behind all of this and why we're even talking about this sort of thing. And I'm not necessarily saying this is a bad thing. These sorts of stories come up from time to time, and they're usually promoted by somebody for a certain political gain. I think the interesting thing about this whole narrative is the idea that sincerely held religious beliefs are as valid in any given situation as anything else. And this gets into the bakers that don't want to make the cake for the gay couple. This gets into, the wedding planner that doesn't want to work with the two gay dudes, the venue that refuses them. It essentially gets into a certain right to or to not discriminate based upon certain things. And there is this idea, particularly in the more red, more conservative America, that if that's just your biblical belief and all this sort of thing, then you should be able to discriminate people based on it. And I mean, I'm sorry, that doesn't carry much water with me. Especially if you are a professional, if you're a master's degree in psychology and you're going to be a therapist and helping people, you can send me to a different therapist that might be a better fit or whatever have you, but you shouldn't be able to just bludgeon your way with your religious dogma over someone's head. The same thing with a lot of these other cases. I've owned small businesses with physical locations, and I do believe in the small business person's right to be able to refuse business to any person they don't want to do business with. I think it should be done in a very polite way as possible. If the professor really wanted to help this student, I would have taken some time before the failing grade to sit down and be kind of like, you can make your point, but you've got to be clever. And sometimes you don't necessarily have time to do that in a big graduate seminar. If you have a lot of students, you don't have time to do that. But there was a different way to handle this. Unfortunately, it's now turned into a national scandal. Turning Point USA is definitely a part of that. No surprise there. They've been doing this for a while. This type of story has been popping out time and again for 20 years. I'm very sympathetic to the girl who wrote the paper. Don't misinterpret this that I think she's terrible, whatever have you. I'm very sympathetic to her cause, because I was that student at one time too. I grew up in a world where the Bible said it, we shouldn't do it, that's say nothing more. That's all I needed to hear. There's a way to do it that's clever. She failed to be clever. Unfortunately, this professor is being targeted because they're trans, and it was a paper about gender identity. It's the perfect storm. It's the perfect situation to unfortunately have this story be taken advantage of by a certain news narrative. Both sides are guilty of this sort of thing. This is how our news politics are now. It sucks. It does. But you know what? It keeps us here every Monday night talking about it. And I think there's some value in having these discussions and really understanding what free speech actually means from a practical perspective. What our expectations of institutions are, what our expectations of people are. I think you also have to understand this is set in a secular setting. I grew up in Christian schools. That's okay at a Christian university or college, and perhaps you should have been pursuing a graduate degree at one of those institutions. There are many. She could have gone to Brigham Young in Utah, or she could have gone to Oral Roberts, which is just down the road from OU, by the way. She could have gone to Oral Roberts and done the same thing, and she would have been fine. To keep talking and understanding what this means in practical terms, but also to understand that people are going to get targeted for this stuff increasingly. And this is part of a lot of the social changes we're seeing in America today. And I think that's of vital importance to us all. I want to wrap up quickly with a couple fluff stories. One, this is funny. Gen Z shoppers aren't spending like retailers need them to. And when I saw this morning, I laughed out loud because they said the same thing about millennials. They're not buying napkins. They're not buying this. They're not buying that. They're not buying houses. They're not buying. Well, who has money and jobs? Like it says here, more than other generations, 20-somethings are tightening their holiday season budgets because of economic pressures. Because they don't have any money. And if you want to find out why Gen Z doesn't have any money and millennials don't have a lot of money, you need to check out my new book, America's Lost Generation. In fact, I think I have it right here. America's Lost Generation, right here. You need to check this book out simply because the reason why Gen Z does not have any money and isn't starting the shopping season is because of the economic factors contained within this book. It looks at this problem through the lens of Japan, and this is the story behind this headline. And I just kind of laugh because they're doing it again. They're doing it again. Millennials went through this same dumb stuff. And they're doing it to Gen Z. It's spend, 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 make the economy work. It's like, will you pay us good wages? Will you make jobs available? Well, no. Well, then what are we supposed to spend? They never have an answer for that. This is the story behind it. I wanted to stop and mention that story, mostly because I could mention my book, but also to be outraged that this was happening again to Gen Z. And Gen Z, I feel so sorry for you, because this definitely sucks. And thank you, Tyrone, for buying the book. I appreciate every single order. There's a lot of great people who've bought the book lately, and I appreciate everybody who's buying. If you want to pick up a copy yourself, you can head over to Amazon. You can also head right to CameronJournal.com and click on Shop Cameron's Books. It's right at the top. It's the big long one, Shop Cameron's Books, and you can place an order with me directly as well. I love direct orders because I make more money. But you can also get it on Amazon. It's on Kindle Unlimited, all that type of thing, and it's great for the holiday season. So make sure to check that out. The other one I also love, we have the Christmas video from Melania Trump and what the White House is going to look like for Christmas this year. So I just kind of wanted to gloss over that because Benny Johnson was trying to say that Jill Biden's tap dancing multiracial holiday extravaganza was bad and that Melania was bringing class back to the White House, sort of thing. You know, again, a completely dumb narrative. But I thought we would look at what the Christmas thing was doing and happening and all this sort of thing. It looks cute. It looks fine. It's very typical of her style. It's very it's very dressed down. It's very simple. Not a lot of muss and fuss. I mean, this is the woman who doesn't really care about any of this stuff, so I didn't expect an extraordinary effort. But here we go with the gingerbread house and the little holy family and all this sort of thing. So they released this video today for the White House. So I thought that'd be a fun thing to just kind of look at and dash by on the way thing. This is a big foreign policy discussion about Japan, and I will save that for the newsletter because we're not getting into that right now. And also they're selling off all the art and murals, and we'll talk about that in the newsletter or next week. So yeah, so it's fun. We have fun here. My name is Cameron Cowan. This is the Cameron Journal News Hour. We're here every Monday at 7. Please catch me online at Cameron Cowan on Instagram and Twitter, at Cameron Journal on TikTok. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it. I love you for watching. We had a wonderful group tonight. Make sure to share this with your friends. Let them know. Follow me everywhere you're on social. Make sure to subscribe to the newsletter, CameronJournal.com/newsletter or CameronJournal.substack.com. And I will see you on the newsletter on Saturday and next Monday. Don't forget to join me on Wednesday when the guys are here for The Living Joke. Completely different show, Morning Zoo. We have fun. We talk about gaming, podcasts, all this type of thing. We're every Wednesday at 4. Will and Connor will be here and we'll have a lot of fun. So, I'll see you next Monday. So I'll see you on Wednesday for The Living Joke, Saturday for the newsletter, and next Monday for the news hour. I'll talk to everybody soon now. Bye-bye.